Okay, let's welcome to part two. Part two, we're going to talk a little bit, it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to emphasize what's going on in South Africa. South Africa was in a different situation and a pattern of conflict was different. Here, slavery plays a very small role. You'll notice I've got this picture over here, excuse me, with slave ports. And notice they stop down here about Angola. They don't extend deeper into South Africa. So it's really a competition between settlers and Africans for land. Now remember back, remember who were the first people to really build a colony down there? That's right, it was the Dutch, it was Holland at the Cape of Good Hope, down at the Cape of Good Hope. And what happens is over time, more and more Europeans live there, and as they expand, they bring in European government control. And there's also a desire for Europeans to use Africans as laborers. Please understand, South Africa is very different than this, what up here where they're getting slaves up here along the equator. The environment is much more similar to the Mediterranean world rather than to the hot equatorial world where they're drawing slaves from. Okay, the African diaspora. Diaspora, remember, we defined this at the very beginning, is a word that talks about leaving, lots and lots of people leaving. Here, what's being imported and what was the trade like in Africa during this time? Imports were European firearms. They wanted to buy those. Remember, we talked about those in the earlier lecture where they said, where it was they bought firearms so they could get more slaves, and they traded slaves for firearms, and in order to keep getting firearms they needed more slaves, so it was a vicious cycle. They also liked Indian textiles, Indonesian shells, American tobacco. They exported ivory, gold, and slaves. Now as the price of slaves grows and the price for ivory and gold grow, um, the traders really benefits. So some of the African traders. Also, I like this map. I don't know how well you can see it. I need to maybe take it out and put it. But you can see these numbers. About 500,000 slaves imported to the United States, 4 to 5 million to the Caribbean, and you can see about 3.5 to 5 million taken to Brazil. So you can see the numbers are huge in the Caribbean and Brazil. That's where they're doing all the sugar growing. Okay, also, I like this one. You can see the British Caribbean, a few to the Danish Caribbean, a lot to the French, the Dutch, and a lot of them taken to Brazil. Smaller numbers taken to Spanish America. I don't know if you guys remember, but what Spanish America have that they need slaves for? It's not plantation agriculture, not plantation agriculture, but that's right, silver mining. Silver mining. Okay, what was life like for slaves? What happened to slave lives? Well, number one, there was frequently separation from friends and family. Um, they were often forced to march to coastal pens. These are areas, remember the slave fort I showed you earlier? They were frequently forced to march to those. There was the Middle Passage. That was the nickname given to the passage from Africa to the Americas on the boat. It was called the Middle Passage because the first passage is being taken from your village to the port. The second passage is taken on boat, and the third passage is from the port where you're dumped off in the Americas, taken on to the slave plantation itself. Middle Passage was very traumatic as there was up to 20% mortality. They did retain some of their languages, beliefs, traditions, memories. Let me go back just a second. These languages, beliefs, and memories are going to play a big role in influencing their culture and influencing how they impact the Americas. Okay, what kind of jobs did slaves in the Americas do? Well, first of all, you've got the large plantation work. The big, profitable early ones is sugar, later rice, and cotton and tobacco are also ones. We got a picture here of this is actually supposed to be cultivation of rice in the West Indies, or not rice, I'm sorry, sugar. Sugar, and it shows them with hose. They're going to dig in a line with their overseer, their master. Second, they're involved in mining. Remember, that's big, particularly in Mexico and Peru with silver mining. They have replaced indigenous people working in jobs such as the encomienda system, and also they replace indentured servitude. They're cheaper than indentured servants, and you keep them for life. But mostly they work in agriculture, predominantly agriculture. Compare the demographics of the various parts of the Americas. Peru, blacks outnumber others. In the Caribbean, slaves vastly outnumber whites. 80 to 90% of the population can be slaves or freed Africans. Large. In Brazil, there are a large population of slaves, but Brazil is more diverse than many places. The U.S. South um, depended more on reproduction and less on imports of slaves. In other words, they're less dependent upon Africa for new slaves. The 500,000 they bring in a lot of women, and they're encouraged to have children, and so they don't need to step out and buy from other places. It also reduces the degree of African cultural reinforcement. In other words, what do I mean by that? Think of it this way, guys. If every year in the Caribbean we're getting new uh, slaves brought in, and lots of them, they keep reintroducing our African traditions. But if it's in the southern United States and you only see new slaves from Africa every so often, a lot of that contact in memory gets lost or changed over time. All right? What happens to, are there resistance movements? Are there resistance to this form of slavery? Yes, three main ones. The first one here is running away. Some will create can't runaway kingdoms, particularly in South America. Remember, the sugar plantations are closer to the coast, so sometimes they will run to the interior, flee into the interior, and establish their own towns and uh, kingdoms, if you will. Occasionally there's direct confrontation. They they rise up against their masters. The most famous is Suriname, which was a former Dutch plantation colony in which they actually take over and establish a government and run things. They kick out their rulers. And the last one is feigned, that means to pretend, laziness. What I mean by that is they will pretend to be lazy so they don't have to work any harder than they need to. Think of it this way, guys. Are you going to kill yourself? Are you going to work really, really hard if all you're going to do is be a slave tomorrow? It won't benefit your life any better. It won't make your life any better. You're going to be in the same place tomorrow you were today. Well, of course not. And this was true of the slaves as well. All right, last, the end of slave trade and the abolition of slavery. What pressures helped to end slavery in the Americas? I don't know why it's so off on the lines, but just basically know there are four things going on here. First, it's based on things beyond the Africans' control, such as Enlightenment, Age of Revolution. By that, we're referring to um, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and even the Haitian Revolution, which we'll talk about more a little bit later. Um, the Industrial Revolution. There's a Christian revivalism, particularly in England. This guy here on your right, um, William Wilberforce, he will lead, he's a devout Christian, and he's going to make the argument that it is wrong to own other people. Number two, Africans begin to trade other items such as peanuts, cotton, palm oil in a way that will make enrich them, and they don't need to sell slaves in order to get rich. Number three, we'll see the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is under Enlightenment, slavery is seen as backward and immoral, and it symbolized cruelty. Number four, England leads the charge. England will, although they've benefited greatly from slavery, they will lead the charge And William Wilberforce, an abolitionist here, this picture here, will do it. He will pressure, England will pressure other countries, and the last country to abolish slavery in the Americas is Brazil, and they do it in 1888. All right, thank you for listening to part two. I'll see you in class.